Welcome to this Hey Legal exclusive. Content that will keep you up to date and informed about the important legal issues of the day. Time is of the essence, so let's begin.
Tommy, good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming on to Hey Legal. And I am just going to start by asking you, or reading out to you, I should say, your tweet from yesterday, which was just finished an 8-day High Court trial at Glasgow with the jury at the remote centre at the Odeon Braehead throughout. Ran like clockwork, fantastic work by Scottish Courts Tribunal Service. So I bet that's a tweet you never thought you'd be sending, but how was it?
Honestly, a really, really positive experience. I mean, we've all seen IT failures in courtrooms, and I mean, as recently as a couple of months ago, I was doing a commission in the East Court in Glasgow, and the accused were in the West Court, and they were having difficulty even connecting the audio between the two courts, which were separated by about 50 yards. So we were all a wee bit sceptical that they managed to pull this off, but really they've done a fantastic job, and it's no exaggeration to say that in 8 full court days that really no problems whatsoever around, as I said.
And so what is the practical experience for you then as counsel?
Well, I mean, the main change, it's probably helpful just to explain how things were before COVID, and the main changes really relate to the first day of the trial. So under the old arrangements, once that start time was identified for the trial, obviously counsel for the prosecution and the defence, the judge and the clerk would all be there. But in addition, there would be about 40 or 50 jurors sitting on the public benches in the courtroom, and they would be spoken to briefly by the clerk, and then the clerk would physically put the 50 names into a bowl, and as each juror was pulled out the bowl, the juror would come down and sit effectively in the sort of well of the court, just behind the well of the court. And then the judge would give fairly brief introductory remarks as to what would happen. That was a big challenge, obviously, because with social distancing, we didn't have in any of the High Court's rooms big enough to have 60 people sitting in the public benches with 2 metres between them. So they had to find a solution. And the solution they found, firstly, was to take the jury out of the courtroom, and they've organised a contract with the Odeon Group where the jury are in the cinema.
It's 16 hours.
However, that didn't help them with the empanelling, because even the cinemas would have a difficulty if 60 people were turning up to be empanelled. And the way they get around that was to make a small alteration to the rules, which allows all the jurors to stay at home on day one. So day one, we turn up just as before, the judge, the clerk, the counsel. The clerk has a list of jurors in front of him or her, and then in the same way picks out the 15 jurors. They're not in the courtroom, they're on the end of a phone, and in advance. So what generally happens is in the morning, they tell the lawyers not to come until 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and in the morning the clerk phones all the people on the list to say, we're about to pick a jury, your name is on the list, you might be picked for jury service, so stay by your phone. They then pick 15 jurors, and in addition, they pick 5 potential substitute jurors. And provided there are no other preliminary matters to be dealt with, the lawyers all go home at that point on day one. The clerk of court then phones the 15 jurors and then the 5 substitutes, tells them that they have been picked, and tells them that they have to be at the remote jury centre at 10 o'clock the following morning. So that's all that happens on day one. Namely, we deal with preliminaries, we pick the jury from the list, we don't see any of the jurors. We come back on day 2, and at that point, the link is activated by the judge, and they have about probably 4 70-inch TV screens sort of bolted together so that it looks like one big TV screen. The jurors, when they come to the cinema, they have 15 seats pre-marked, and so they turn up and say, right, you're number 1, you sit there in the front row, you're number 2, you sit in the third row, you're number 3, you sit in the fifth row. And the beauty of it is, at the front of the cinema, they have 15 separate cameras,
right,
and the cameras are trained in each of the dedicated seats. So when we go in day 2, the judge puts switches on the link, and on this bank of TV screens, we see the 15 jurors, right, as if they were all sitting together, you know. Yep. So, you know, there's, in fact, they are spread all over the seats of a cinema, but what we see is simply what we would more or less see in the jury box, 15 right. faces. And therefore, all through it, the judge is making sure that, you know, the link's live, that they can see everything that we see. And ultimately, the only real strange aspect of it is at the end, because obviously at the end you make your closing speech to the jury, and instead of standing in front of them in the jury box, looking them in the eyes, you're standing on the other side of the court addressing a sort of bank of TV screens, you know. And that sounds a lot weirder than it actually is, because, you know, it was an 8-day trial. So by the time you get to speak to the jury, you've been sitting in those circumstances with them for 6 days.
See, that's your co-workers that have come in.
She's out. Right, on you go. Sorry,
I know that this is quite irregular. I think you on BBC, was it Radio Scotland, and they made it a
She made her debut on Drive Time Scotland about 3 months ago, and now she wants to get into the action. There's 2 of them on, and one of them's good as gold, and the other one's a bit mad. So she's now battering the door to get back in. Aye, so that's what I'm saying. So when you get to speak to the jury, you've kind of got used to it, and sounds odd talking about it, but it didn't seem all that odd doing it, you know.
Yeah. And is it something, I think Ian McSporran in previous discussions we've had about this topic talked about, you know, the question of building a rapport with the jury. Did you get any sense of that?
I think that would be really, really difficult. I mean, I did a case under the same arrangements, although the jury were actually in a different courtroom in the court building rather than the cinema. But from our perspective, there was no difference. And I think in a case where there was a lot of emotion in it, and, you know, you were sort of appealing to the emotion of the situation, it would definitely be a disadvantage, you know. This was a case where there were 10 alleged victims and quite a lot of ground to cover. So it was more of a sort of technical speech than you might have in some cases, you know. I think you probably need to tailor your approach slightly. But that said, I suppose the worry is it's impossible to communicate with them at all. It was a case where ultimately there were 9 alleged victims, and the jury went out at 11:45 on Wednesday and didn't come back until 11:45 on Thursday, you know. Right. So they were engaged sufficiently in the process that even by 4:00 on the first day of their deliberations, they were declared that they were still thinking about it and they needed more time, you know, which is an encouraging sign, because I suppose you might think that people in these circumstances would be less likely to engage with the whole process, but there was no sign of that at all. And ultimately, there were convictions, there were acquittals, there were not proven verdicts, there were guilty verdicts, you know. They really, and the acquittals made absolute sense to everybody, you know. So it was clear that they got it, that they understood what the issues in the case were. So all in all, not that different from a normal trial, which is clearly what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And do you think the atmosphere in the courtroom was changed in any way because the jury wasn't physically present?
Well, I mean, they don't tend to be present when you're having discussions with the people around the table anyway. You know, I mean, you would normally have those discussions at a time when the jury were away for a break or at lunchtime or something. So probably not. I mean, they can see everything in the courtroom in the same way as a jury who were physically sitting in the courtroom there. So you've really just got to be as careful, you know, as you would be if they were sitting in the court. Yeah. I heard somebody say there had been a problem trying to communicate with the accused. The jury had heard something that was said, but that wasn't. I mean, I didn't speak much to him in the dock as it happened, but that would surprise me. You know, if the equipment was as sensitive as to allow that sort of thing to be picked up, because they don't have any microphones in that area or anything like that, you know. So
yeah, well, we asked for questions earlier, indicating we were recording today, and that was one of the things that came up, was about communication with the accused and microphones, and the ability to do so effectively when you think you're possibly being heard, obviously in the remote location. Yeah,
I mean, it did occur to me that, and I'm in this sort of unusual position where they recorded. I've spoken to you about it, the Inverkip case, and quite early on in the Inverkip case, the team who were recording it said to me, "Can you stop moving about? Because, you know, we've got a microphone there to pick up the questions that you're asking, and you're sort of wandering away and standing with your back against the door, and then the microphone." And I wonder, I'd never thought of that before, you know, because nobody really has that kind of conversation. And I was deliberately talking into the microphone all the time, conscious of the fact that if I didn't do that, it might be that the jury wouldn't hear what was said. And I don't think you would worry about that so much if the jury were sitting beside you. You know, I mean, often your position when you're asking the questions is 2 feet away from the jury. So you wouldn't really worry about whether you were speaking into the microphone if they were right beside you. Whereas, you know, you have to do that. But again, it just becomes second nature, you know, very. So I think there are some cases where you would much prefer not to do it that way. But the reality is there's no other way of doing it at the moment.
Yeah. But one of the things that I'm unclear about is how the jury see the accused. Do they see the accused on the screen all the time?
Yeah, but only as part of a sort of wider view of the courtroom. So they can see the courtroom, so basically the screen which the jury are looking at is a cinema screen.
Yeah.
So it's massive and it's divided into 4. And they see the person who's speaking to them on one quarter of the screen. They see a sort of view of the court on a different quarter of the screen. And if there are any documents or videos been shown in the course of the trial, then they see that on a different quarter. So they don't have a close-up view of the accused at any time, as I understand it. Okay. But because they have a sort of general view of the entire courtroom, the accused is obviously part of the scene. That said, the clerk gave us the option. When it came to speeches at the end of the trial, the clerk gave us the option of having our image shown in the entire screen. And I thought that was better because they wouldn't be distracted by looking at anything else. But I mean, I wouldn't. That's something that nobody should be exposed to, having a look at his face on the big screen in the Odeon, you know. So somebody might raise a human rights point about that at some stage, I would imagine. But
I think you're being,
you know, but so you don't ever get that sort of close up of anybody other than when they did it for the 2 speeches, and I think they also did it when the judge was charging the jury. I think he was on the whole screen. But those stages at the end of the trial apart, they're always looking at a screen which is split into 4 parts.
Yeah.
with different things on the four parts.
Yeah. And do you think, this links to one of the questions we were asked, do you think this trial...
Okay.
Has this model lent itself to the trial actually running more efficiently?
Well, I think so, because obviously the prosecution have to think really hard about what witnesses they really need and which witnesses, excuse me, if I send this text, she'll stop phoning me, which witnesses they need, which witnesses can be agreed, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I suppose there is a sort of natural pressure, a sort of natural pressure to try and do it as economically as possible, because it's an odd time for everybody. You don't want to bring witnesses into a public building if you don't need to bring them. You don't want to keep the jury having to go to a kind of odd, slightly odd location on the outskirts of Glasgow for 10 days if they only really need to go for 7 days. So it's probably more of a pressure on the prosecution, I would think, you know.
Yeah.
And that was that was a sort of odd case in the sense that it's been presented as a mutual corroboration case dependent on 10 different complainers. And most prosecutors would take the view, well, if they've heard 10 complainers and they don't believe them, you know, calling a couple of police officers to speak about procedural things is probably not going to make that much of a difference, you know.
Yeah.
So I kind of got the impression that everybody will be trying to minimise the amount of evidence that is called. And I suppose it's possible that that will occasionally work to the benefit of the accused.
Yeah. Another question that was asked, Tommy, was could this model be the new normal post-COVID, and the courtroom size scaled down to make space for more courts within each building in an attempt to run more trials per day?
Well, I don't see how you could. I mean, it would cost millions to start partitioning the courtrooms in the Salt Market, you know. Yeah. So basically they've squeezed into the Salt Market building in Glasgow as many courts as they can. They've recently converted a staff canteen. They took our social area away from us and turned that into a courtroom. So really the Salt Market building's at bursting point already. I don't think they could create more courtrooms in there. I suppose it's a very sensible question. I suppose what it means is now that the jury are not sitting in the public benches waiting to be empanelled, could we use the public benches for more court space?
Yeah.
You can't, because, you know, when this blows over, if it ever does, then the public will be back on the public benches, you know. The family of the accused and the family of the victims and all that will be in the public benches. So I don't think it will increase the capacity. However, the other problem is, presumably the Odeon, although they're glad of the money that's coming from the Scottish courts at the moment, they would much rather have people in watching James Bond and Borat, you know, paying 20 quid a couple. So, you know, I would imagine at some point the Odeon will be hoping to go back to normal Odeon business. And the question then is, well, where do you get somewhere as ideal as the Odeon or, you know, a cinema to do this? Because, you know, it was an absolutely perfect solution. They've got all the technology, you know, they've got the Wi-Fi, they've got screens, you know, they've got space, they've got all the, you know, all the things that you need to outsource a jury. But, you know, if the Odeon kick the courts out and say, right, we're going back to James Bond and Harry Potter, where do you go then? You know, it's not easy to imagine, and it probably would end up costing an awful lot more than going back to the court and doing it the old way, you know. So there's absolutely, in technical terms, there's absolutely no reason why they couldn't do this forever. But the reality is they're using facilities which are not court facilities. I think they've got a 6-month contract, and I assume whenever the Odeon are given the all clear to go back to business, then they'll have to find an alternative solution.
They will. What is the position currently for the public, families that are interested or whatever, and also the press to actually view what's going on?
Well, it's a bit of a mess, to be honest, because our accused mother was actually sitting outside court in a car, and I thought this was by design. And then when it was too late, somebody told me that she'd tried to get into the court building, and somebody had said that the public were not allowed in court, which isn't right. But they are limiting the numbers. So, I think they'll allow maybe 2 or 3 of your relatives to sit. And, if there's a victim in the case, then they'll allow 2 or 3 of the victim's family. But they're obviously marked out the seats so that there is social, some seats are marked as not to be used, so that they can maintain 2-metre distance between people. And when you do that, actually, it doesn't leave very much space. The really sad thing about it is there's a guy called Michael who comes by public transport from Paisley just about every day just to sit in the court and watch the trials, and they won't let him in at the moment. So that's a bit of a shame. He turned up last week and they told him that he couldn't get in because of COVID. So it's a bit, I mean, the press are allowed in, but generally speaking, it's very, very unusual for anybody other than the court. There's a press corps in the Glasgow High Court, which is only 2 or 3 of them. And obviously one of them, if they're interested in a case, only one of them will come and cover it, and the other guys will go somewhere else. So there's no restriction on somebody coming in and watching. But it does seem they've been sort of discouraged when they're trying to get in the front door through security,
Yeah, so that's maybe something that does need looked at or refined, perhaps.
Yeah. Strangely enough, I wasn't involved in one of the early experiments. They used 3 courts to do a trial in Glasgow at one point, and they had the jury in one court, they had the lawyers in another court, and then they had the family of the deceased, I think, in a third court. And that seemed to be important then. And, I suppose they're just taking the view, well, you just have to decide that, people are making these decisions now about funerals and weddings. And, so I suppose they just say, well, 3 of you can come, but no more.
Yeah. And do you think, so with the success that you've outlined in relation to the whole procedure that you're going through with this remote trial, do you think this can get us back to the kind of pre-COVID levels of trial business? No,
I don't, because the real problem they have at the moment is they can only really do trials where there are no more than 3 accused. And I haven't actually seen a 3 accused trial yet. So the ones that tend to be on the list are either single accused trials or 2 accused trials. Because if you have 2 accused in the dock, along with security officers, and they've all got to have a bit of social distancing, it's hard to get really beyond 2 accused.
Right.
And, I've got a attempted murder case where there are 9 accused. I've got a drugs case where there are 8 accused, and the reality is nobody in the system has got any idea when they're ever going to see a trial, because they cannot do 9 accused trials under these arrangements. So there's that. And the other thing is that when things are really going well in Glasgow High Court, there are 8 trial courts now, so there's the east, the west, the north and the south, then 3, 4, 5 and 6. So when things are going all guns blazing in Glasgow, they can do cases with any number of accused, and they can do 8 trials at a time. And I think the best they've managed up to now is about 4 or something.
Right.
So it's kind of, it's hard. And the diary having been organised into a nice order in March, has basically been thrown up in the air. And now they're trying to, the moment they're doing cases where a trial had been allocated in March, but there's literally hundreds of people waiting for High Court trials now who have never actually appeared in court, that their case just is continually postponed because all they can do is fix a trial, and they don't have the power to fix a trial at the moment, for one reason or another. So it's got, if they were able to get 8 cinemas and find a solution to the multiple accused problem, then there's no actual reason why they couldn't be doing 8 trials with the jury at the cinemas, which would be the same levels as pre-COVID. But it's pretty hard to find cases that they can actually, to find 8 cases all at the same time, which don't create any particular problem under these arrangements. It's a bit of a challenge, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it seems to be a solution of sorts, because I've noticed that for the past couple of days there's been a lot of debate and discussion down south about the problems they're facing, and trials now being adjourned until 2022 and whatever, and horrendous times of people on remand and stuff, just because they just simply don't have the court architecture or the resources to process business. So
you're right, and everybody balks at that when they hear, well, you've got a trial in 2021 or 2022, but there's a kind of honesty about that. I've just come back from prison where people are saying to me, I've been in custody since January 2019. When is my trial going to be? And I have to say, I don't have the slightest idea. What I can tell you is that I've seen the diary up until March 2021, and you're not on it.
Yeah.
And therefore you're in the same position as, 1,000 other people. So although it is unsatisfactory to tell somebody their trial's not until December next year, I'm not sure it's any better just to keep them in custody indefinitely, with absolutely no information as to when the trial might be. Yeah.
Well, it sounds overall as though it's a positive start. At least it's something, and it's starting to deal with some business, but it's obviously early days and much still to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the court service deserve a lot of credit for it, because, they weren't at fault for these circumstances, and you can see the multiple accused problem is a difficult problem to get round, Yeah. So it's kind of hard to, now that they've got things up and running, it'd be hard to say really they could have done any better with it. It's a great solution, and it allows people to get trials. However, they're sort of hand-picking the trials, so you definitely get, the other one I did was all the witnesses were prison officers. So, you need a sort of certainty. These are police, prison officers will come, people who are making a complaint and seem intelligent, respectable people will come. But a lot of trials throw up particular problems that arise from the personnel who are accused or Crown witnesses. And, I kind of get the impression they're just deliberately avoiding those problematic cases and doing the ones where there's a reasonable certainty that they can run them without too many problems, And that makes perfect sense, because if you paid all this money for the facility, you don't want the jury turning up 4 days in a row at 10 o'clock only to be back home for 10:30, You want to try and use the time profitably, and as far as I can see, they're doing that.
Yeah. Well, listen, Toby, thank you very much for taking the time. You've had a busy week, and we're recording this. It's now coming up to 4:30 on a Friday, so the working week's coming to an end, but it seems as though it's overall been a good one. And I'd love to say have a great night out tonight, but I know that's not going to be happening.
Listen, it was good to have a couple of working weeks. I feel a lot better for it. It's strange that as things are drifting and nothing is happening, I don't think you realise it can have an effect on your mood a bit. That you've been doing this job for years, and in a level you can enjoy doing it, and you enjoy the challenge every day, having to deal with different witnesses and all that. And when you don't have that, I think your mood can become a wee bit low. So my wife has certainly noticed that I've been a lot happier this week just because I've been back in about it, you know.
Yeah, she'll be glad to get you out of the house.
Well, that is true. Aye. But I certainly don't blame her for that. And you know, at least in her case, she volunteered to look at this face for a few years. You know, if it's just the poor jury, I feel sorry for, you know.
Brilliant. Well, listen, thank you so much. It's fantastic. I'm sure that the people who view this will learn a lot from it, and we really appreciate you taking the time. So thanks very much.
Right, thanks very much. See you later.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
We hope this Hey Legal exclusive content has been of value to you. Hey Legal exclusive. Follow us please on YouTube and Twitter, and create a free account on our website to stay informed and entertained about Scottish legal matters as they happen.